My Weird School, Book Number 11, Mrs. Kormel is Not Normal. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Palott. Chapter 4. Are we there yet? We hadn't even met him yet, but suddenly everybody on the bus was buzzing about the nude kid. Some people don't believe in wearing clothes, said Andrea, who thinks she knows everything. They're called nudists. I call them freaks, said Ryan. My parents say we should respect and celebrate people's differences, Emily said. Your parents are weird, I told her. What's the big deal? Andrea asked. After all, we were born without clothing. You were born without a brain, I couldn't resist adding. Anytime anyone says anything about being born, always say they were born without a brain. That's the first rule of being a kid. I'm nude under my clothes, Ryan told us. Thanks for sharing that with us, I told him. Now I'm totally grossed out. Andrea said that nudists save a lot of money because they don't have to buy clothes. But Michael said that nudists have to spend a lot of money because they always have to buy sunscreen. But Emily said that nudists save a lot of money because they don't have to do laundry. But Ryan said that nudists have to spend a lot of money to heat their houses because they're so cold. The nude kid probably doesn't even have a closet at home, I said, because he doesn't have any clothes to put in it. Do you think nude kids are allowed to wear hats? Asked Michael. Zingy zip, yelled Mrs. Kormel. Mrs. Kormel had pulled out a big map, and she had opened it up on top of the steering wheel. She told us we had to be quiet while she figured out the directions. I bet it's hard to drive and look at a map at the same time. To make things even worse, it started raining. Mrs. Kormel put the windshield wipers on. All the girls started to sing, "The wipers on the bus go swish, 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 swish." Zingy zip, Mrs. Kormel yelled again. I can't concentrate. We drove for a long time in the rain. It was hard to go so long without talking. Are we there yet? Somebody asked. No, said Mrs. Kormel. Are we lost? Emily asked. Of course not, said Mrs. Kormel. I just don't know where we are. Oh no, we're going to miss show and share, Andrea said to Emily like she was all worried. And I spent all weekend making my spelling flashcards. Ha ha ha, I spent all weekend playing football. Na 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 boo boo on her. We were going to be late for school. It was great. I hoped Mrs. Kormel wouldn't find the right way to the nude kid's house for a while, because right after show and cheer, we have math. And I hate math. Chapter 5. The Middle of Nowhere. Mrs. Kormel drove for 1,100,000 hours, and we still hadn't reached the nude kid's house. Where was it? Now show and share was over for sure. We probably missed math, too. If we didn't get to school soon, we would miss our dear time. That stands for drop everything and read. I hate reading. Finally, we drove by some big trucks, and there was a sign that said, Detour. Hey, we're going to take a tour, said Ryan. Tours are cool. Detours aren't tours, dumbhead, said Andrea. Workers are fixing the road, so Mrs. Kormel has to get off this road and go another way to the nude kid's house. Bix Blattinger, said Mrs. Kormel as she slammed her fist against the steering wheel. I don't know what Bix Blattinger means, but that's what Mrs. Kormel always says when she gets really angry or frustrated." "What does Bix Blattinger mean, Mrs. Kormel?" I asked. "Never you mind," said Mrs. Kormel. "I think Mrs. Kormel must have said a bad word," said Ryan. "But she said it in secret language," Michael said, "so we won't know what it means." "You shouldn't say bad words." We all tried to figure out which bad word Mrs. Kormel said. I had heard most of the bad words, but Michael and Ryan knew a few that I didn't know, and they taught them to me. So even though we were really late for school, it was still a learning experience. After we got off the regular road, the road we were on wasn't even a real road. It was more like a jungle or a swamp or something. There were these big plants slapping against bus windows. The ride was bumpy, and it was still raining. Mrs. Kormel could barely see in front of her. "This is like the rainforest," Andrea said. "I hope we don't get eaten by alligators," said Michael. "Look!" somebody yelled. A family of ducks was crossing the road in front of us. "They're cute!" shouted all the girls. "Let's run them over!" shouted all the boys. I didn't really want Mrs. Kormel to run over the ducks, but it was hilarious anyway. Mrs. Kormel kept on driving, but I didn't see the nude kid's house anywhere. In fact, I didn't see any houses or human beings. "Where are we?" somebody asked. "The middle of nowhere," said Mrs. Kormel. I said it was too bad we weren't at the edge of nowhere, because if we were at the edge of nowhere, we'd be right next to the edge of somewhere, and the edge of somewhere is near the middle of somewhere, which is where we want it to be. Ryan said we were probably close to the nude kid's house, because if you were nude, you'd probably live in the middle of nowhere. That way nobody would see you, and that's where we were. It made sense to me. Andrea looked at her watch and got all upset. "We missed deer time," she complained. "We're very late for school now." "Ha ha ha! This was the greatest day of my life." "Don't worry, Andrea," said Mrs. Kormel. "I'll get you to school if it's the last thing I do." Just then, I had a genius thought. Right after deer time is spelling. I hate spelling. And if we missed deer time and we weren't even at the nude kid's house yet, there was a good chance that we were going to miss spelling too. And that meant I would miss the big spelling test, which I didn't study for. I decided that the nude kid was the coolest kid in history of the world. Thanks to him, we were going to miss the big spelling test. "Bix Blattinger," said Mrs. Kormel. "Ooh," we all said. Mrs. Kormel said that bad word again. Chapter 6. The Nude Kid's Dad. Finally, Mrs. Kormel stopped the bus in front of a house and pushed the button to make the magic stop sign pop out. "This must be the nude kid's house," Ryan said. It looked like a pretty normal house. There was a swing set on the lawn and a car in the driveway. You would never know that nudists lived there. Nobody came out of the house, so Mrs. Kormel honked the horn. We all craned our necks to get a look at the nude kid, but he didn't come out. "Where is he?" Ryan asked. Suddenly, the front door of the house opened. A guy came out with an umbrella, and it was the most amazing thing in the history of the world. You know why? Because the guy had clothes on. The guy with clothes on came over to the bus. He climbed up the steps and said something to Mrs. Kormel. "Bix Blattinger, muttered Mrs. Kormel after the guy got off the bus. She was probably mad at Mr. Klutz because he made her drive all the way out to the nude kid's house, and the nude kid wasn't even there. "What did he say?" we all asked. "What did he say?" "He said his wife drove their son to school today on her way to work," Mrs. Kormel told us. "She didn't want him to be late on his first day of school." "Maybe she took him to buy some clothes," said Michael. Mrs. Kormel closed the bus door and made the magic stop sign go back. Before the nude kid's dad went inside his house, me and Ryan leaned out the window and yelled to him, "Hey, mister, do you sleep with clothes on and then take them off after you wake up? Where does your son keep his lunch money if he doesn't have pockets?" It was hilarious. The nude kid's dad just looked at us with this confused expression on his face. Then he went inside. Nudists are weird. Chapter 7. Fighting Evil Under the Bus. Finally, we were back on the road. Mrs. Kormel was mad at Mr. Klutz for making her drive to the nude kid's house for nothing. I was mad because we would be at school soon. Andrea was mad because spelling was over and she didn't get the chance to take the big spelling test and show everybody how smart she was. Well, na-na-na-boo-boo on Andrea. She would go to school on the weekend if it was open. The rain stopped. I was getting hungry. We had missed snack time. It was probably close to lunchtime. We were bored, too, and sick of sitting on the bus. Ryan flipped his light switch on and off. Michael played with his ball of string. I played with Striker Smith. That's when I got the most genius idea in the history of the world. We could tie Michael's string to Striker Smith's leg and fly him out the window. Michael and Ryan realized what a genius I was. We tied the string to Striker Smith and opened the window. "You're going to get in trouble, AJ," said Andrea. "We're not supposed to hold things out the window." "Can you possibly be any more boring?" I asked Andrea. "We're not holding anything out the window. The string will hold him." Ryan tossed Striker Smith out the window. "Look," Ryan said. "He's flying." It was cool. Striker Smith was doing loops in the air. You should have been there. "He's fighting evil outside the bus," said Michael. "Mrs. Kormel," Andrea whined. AJ threw his doll out the window. "It's not a doll," I told Andrea. "It's an action figure, and it's none of your beeswax." What is her problem? It didn't matter what Andrea said, because Mrs. Kormel didn't hear her anyway. Striker Smith was flying outside the bus, dipping and diving in the wind. He is so cool. The only problem was that suddenly Striker Smith dove down so far that we couldn't see him anymore. "Where is he?" asked Ryan. "He's fighting evil under the bus," I said. But I don't think Striker Smith was fighting evil under the bus, because that's when I heard a pop and a hissing sound. Hiss!